Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, February 8th, 2024, and in just around 5 days, the first special election of the 2024 election season will be underway in New York's 3rd Congressional District. Now, this is former Representative George Santos' congressional district, a district that in the 2022 House elections went to the Republican Party by a margin of around 8 points. George Santos, who was soon expelled from the United States House of Representatives, the first expulsion since the 19th century, and a major news piece that rummaged across the country and gave a bad name to Republicans everywhere, and arguably even worse to New York Republicans. And so in this effort to renew House representation and who represents the party in New York's 3rd District, this special election came to be with hand-picked nominees on both sides of the aisle. The Democrats chose Representative Tom Suozzi, who ran for governor back in 2022 and had served in Congress in Long Island for 3 terms. The Republicans pick Mazi Pilip, who currently serves as a state legislator across the state of New York and is the Republican nominee for Congress. Now, this congressional race here is one that everyone has their eyes on for this election cycle. It will be an indicator largely about the enthusiasm on both sides of the aisle upcoming into this general election season. Right now, the Democratic Party has a slight advantage in this district, despite it being a George Santos +8 district, because in these district boundaries, Joe Biden would have won by a margin of around 8 points as well. And so seeing this Biden +8 turn into a Santos +8 district in 2022, Republicans equally know that they do have an opportunity at winning in this district. But right now, I expect the Republican Party to lose control of this seat to Representative Tom Suozzi, who in a new poll shows a 4-point advantage over the Republican nominee. Now, New York's 3rd District is very unique, again, that it requires a more moderate and tempered type of Democrat and arguably Republican to win in this district, given that it is a Biden district that had historically been very conservative. But in the modern-day GOP, Long Island, in overall, really doesn't seem to be as pro-Trump as many other parts of the country are. Despite it having Republican representation and Republican representatives, it doesn't seem too far away from voting for Joe Biden in this election in the event that Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, which shows increasingly more likely day after day. But my sights are also still focused just on this 3rd district. I think the 4-point lead that we see Democrats experiencing here is already very good news for the Democratic side of the aisle. And the reason for that is because the numbers really haven't shifted over the past month. When Emerson College did their first poll back in January, they found that 45% of voters backed Tom Suozzi and 42% backed Mazi Pilip. Now, with less undecided voters, Siena College, the mainstream and flagship New York pollster for congressional races, Senate races, and presidential races in this state, Siena College finds that Tom Suozzi gets 48% of the vote to Mazi Pilip's 44%, a 4-point advantage. And so this special election, you've seen a lot of consideration around what Republicans and Democrats stand for in the district. I think this is a unique proxy war between Donald Trump and the Democratic Party, mainly Donald Trump and Joe Biden, because this is the first real general election type of election that we will see going into the end of this primary season. It's going to be one that will be largely reliant on core and base turnout by either side of the aisle that will springboard one of them to victory, that right now Democrats do have the upper hand given recent special election performance over the past couple of election cycles. I actually do look back at 2022 as a prime indicator the Democrats actually might do well in New York's district, because the main reason why they didn't in New York in 2022 was because of the governor's race that happened in the state of New York, a race that was never meant to be competitive, that came down to a margin of around 6 points between Kathy Hochul, at the time the lieutenant governor turned governor following the resignation of Andrew Cuomo, and Lee Zeldin, a former U.S. House rep. And in these districts specifically, in Nassau County, in Suffolk County, in regions of the state where you found that Republicans performed the strongest, especially in Long Island. Lee Zeldin defeated Kathy Hochul by 10 in Nassau County. In Suffolk County, won by 16 points. And so to put that into perspective, you are talking about counties where Biden was very competitive. Many counties across the state of New York that Biden won. He defeated Donald Trump in the state of New York by a margin of nearly 30 percentage points. And yet in the governor's race, Kathy Hochul came up so short that she almost lost to a Republican in one of the most solid Democratic states across the country. And so in the down ballot effects, the repercussions of this, because the governor's race was at the forefront of this, you found that the Senate race, you saw Republicans do much better than they had previously against Chuck Schumer. In 2016, he got over 70% of the vote in the Senate race. In 2022, he got around just 57%, even underperforming President Joe Biden. In almost all of the battleground states in the state of New York, battleground districts in the state of New York, Republicans won them. In New York's 3rd, George Santos won by 8. In New York 4th, you saw Republicans win by 4. 17th, Republicans won. 19th, Republicans won. 22nd, Republicans won. And in the competitive column on the Republican side, not only was it not competitive, Republicans ran up the margins. In the 1st district, they won by 11. In the 2nd district, they won by 21. In the 11th district, they won by 24. Again, these were supposed to be the districts that were competitive. And then when you take a look at the Democratic column too, in districts they were supposed to win, arguably by similar margins, they did win the 25th by 8 points, but in the 18th they won by just 1.3 after a special election victory for Pat Ryan in this seat. And so now we're back at a point where I'm showing you all these House numbers in 2022 and just made this argument that this map actually here is the reason why I think Democrats could win, but Republicans had such good results. But that is largely because of the fact that Kathy Hochul simply could not bring over many people across the finish line to vote for Democrats in that race. Many, many voters voted for the GOP despite being lifelong Democrats, Biden Democrats, Clinton Democrats, Schumer Democrats, whatever you want to say, and it resulted in Republican victories up across the House map. But unique to this special election, we are finding it to be very similar to how we've seen Democrats win in other special elections across the United States. In the past 2 years, we have seen Democrats do phenomenally in many of the congressional districts that have been up for election. Even if many of them aren't victories, these moral victories are similar to what we saw back in 2018 that led into an eventual victory for Democrats in the House of Representatives and victories in a bunch of Senate races that sort of, came to be in 2022. Although Democrats did lose House control, they still did extremely well in the governor's races, doing even better than they did in 2018. Extremely well in the Senate races, doing even better than 2018. And in the House, although they lost, many of the states where you saw Democrats rely on their very core angered base that turned out angry, core constituency, especially on the issue of abortion, the House districts, in many cases, that were supposed to be more competitive actually ended up going blue. New York stood out as one of the redder states in the country because, again, of that governor's race that plagued many House Democrats. But this time around, Republicans can't rely on a lackluster Democrat at the top of the ticket. Tom Suozzi has served in this district and arguably has extremely strong name recognition. He served in Long Island for 3 consecutive terms. He left Congress willingly. It wasn't that he lost his race in 2022. He decided to run for governor and lost that nomination, but didn't fall out of the graces of the voters in the state of New York or the voters in the Long Island region. Tom Suozzi is arguably the best pick that Democrats could have chosen for this congressional seat, and is largely the reason why he was able to keep his district blue election cycle after election cycle after election cycle. And even when we look back at the last time Tom Suozzi ran for Congress back in 2020. He won in his 3rd district here, arguably, narrowed up to be a little bit more conservative, but still roughly the same in terms of overall composition. He won by 13 points against none other than former Representative George Santos. And so I know this is something that sort of is just like mind-warping the way we look at this race. Tom Suozzi ran against Santos, left to run for governor, lost the nomination, George Santos wins. And this district really didn't see much of a shift outside of 2 to 3 points in favor of the GOP. Not enough to make up for the fact that Suozzi won by 13, and 2 years later, Santos is winning by 8. And don't even get me started on the lack of opposition research done into George Santos. Arguably, this district should have been at the priority for Democrats up across the country, and it was. You take a look at what the DCCC was focused on, you take a look at the DNC, they did focus on the race, but George Santos's uncoverings should have came out in the election well before. And so maybe we would be in a position where this never would have happened. George Santos never would have been a representative. But he certainly did not give a good look to the GOP whatsoever by even being in Congress in the first place. And I think you are going to see that voters will soon reject the same party that gave them George Santos in the first place, arguably for an extended period of time, rather than having a consistent representative who was advocating for them from Long Island, representing New York. They had somebody who was scandal-plagued and gave a very bad name to the voters, to the constituents, to the island itself, to the state itself, to Congress itself. George Santos is the first expulsion in the House of Representatives since the 1970s. Think about how much you have to do to get to that point. And I'm sure there are representatives who have deserved expulsion besides George Santos. But I think George Santos' expulsion, arguably, as found by Republicans and Democrats alike, was correct and the right decision to be made by that Congress to remove him from office and prompt this special election. I can't even imagine what the general election would have looked like if George Santos ended up being the Republican nominee again. But I show you these numbers from 2020 to tell you that Tom Suozzi has already gotten races on lock. But he cannot ignore the fact that there are some voters out there that just don't want to vote for Democrats, regardless if it's Tom Suozzi or not. That 13-point victory has been reduced to a 4-point advantage, and Mazie Pilip is doing even better than George Santos did in the 2020 election results. With that being said, though, I think there's a reality in which you do see Tom Suozzi win by around 6, 7, 8 points. I think this 4-point estimation from Siena College could be an underestimation, but it also may be an overestimation. I think a combination of factors here lead me to believe that Tom Suozzi is in fact the favorite, as suggested not only by the data, but the fundraising numbers and the historical context. But when you look at it from that lens, Tom Suozzi knows these voters and has won them over 3 iterations in a row. You take a look at the polling data that shows Tom Suozzi with a lead over Mazie Pilip. You take a look at the history of George Santos and the name that he gave to Republicans in the 3rd Congressional District, which certainly isn't positive, and voters have every right and every right and in some cases willingness to reject a party simply because of who they brought forth to the table previously. Voters are very quick to distrust, especially in swing districts where they were rejecting the idea of President Trump, but really loving the idea of Republicans besides him. Because George Santos not really associated himself super heavily with Trump, but with that wing of the party, with the crazies of the GOP being grouped and lumped into the same level of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, it really played a very negative role in the GOP's inability to win in this district, inability to keep it red, despite it being a district they won by 8 points in the last election. And so when I look ahead to 2024, in the general election season, I think this district could be more competitive. But when I look to the immediate and specifically to this upcoming special election, I'm less convinced that there's going to be a Republican victory. Though this is a swing seat, I think you will also see that because we've seen this in a bunch of congressional districts and a bunch of special elections, that the most reliable base to turn out has now become increasingly more Democratic. At the baseline, the angered voters on the issue of abortion, on the issues across the country that are very pressing and beneficial to the Democratic Party, education even, you find that Democrats do turn out and do vote for a party, vote for the Democrats because of issues like this alone. 2022 was a warning sign to the GOP that if they do not get this issue of abortion correct, there could be plenty of elections where there's no enthusiasm on either side, but the default is that many of these swing states vote blue in the idea of protecting reproductive freedoms. And that was Republicans' biggest fear in 2022, that the Dobbs v. Jackson decision would backfire, and we know for a fact that it did. It backfired in 2023, another election cycle in which we saw the Ohio map go blue for Democrats because of abortion when it came down to voting on the issue. In states like Kentucky, you saw Democrats do well there despite it being a state that Donald Trump won by 30 points. New York's 3rd Congressional District, arguably a very pro-choice region too of the Republican parts of the state, it's not going to be easy for Republicans to win, especially against a tried and tested incumbent, even against the former representative, George Santos. So my prediction for New York's 3rd District, 5 days in advance, is that you do see Democrats win. I don't know the margin that I would expect. I honestly would say it's probably around 5, hovering within a few points of 5. But I can't say it's going to be a landslide because I don't think it will be that way. There's clearly enthusiasm in some cases across this country. I don't know if we'll find it in New York's 3rd District, but I do think there will be a level of turnout being a major game and a major factor in this election, and Democrats will come out ahead. Tom Suozzi will be the next representative from New York's 3rd District, based on my estimations, and arguably based on many that we've seen across the country. Right now, we're seeing a lot of polls and a lot of indications here that Tom Suozzi will in fact do quite well across the state. He's across the district. He's significantly out fundraising his Republican opponent. But what I'm most interested in isn't just this New York 3rd Congressional District, special election. It's the general election. It's the 2024 election. And it's what this election might mean and indicate for our upcoming presidential election, Senate elections, and of course, congressional elections that will determine the balance of power of this upcoming Congress. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.